Dan, how do you describe the McConnell-McGrath TV matchup?
I mean, my first takeaway was that it was a rare sight in 2020, just in that it was civil, right? We've seen these really kind of contentious debates so far this year. But, you know, so I'm of the school of thought that when you are tuning into debates, they don't actually really sway voters that much. The type of people who watches a debate tend to be the more politically engaged people. They're just kind of, you know, cheering on their side in many ways. And so then when you look at this sort of debate, you look at the type of messaging that the candidates did that, you know, appeal to their base. And where Amy McGrath really kind of did well, she's struggled in debates in the past. She's never really been seen as the best debater. And, you know, it felt like for the first time in her campaign, she really kind of shut up a lot of her detractors among the Democratic base. And so, you know, you felt like she came out with a little bit of swagger. She seemed a little bit more confident the next day. You know, when she was talking to reporters the next day, she said, "I slept great last night," right? At the same time, McConnell, who he's in a position as the majority leader where he's going to be on the defensive because he's got to defend a record where she can just attack it. He still, you know, he did what McConnell does. He stuck to his talking points. And, you know, the message that he was really trying to get across there was that, you know, a vote for Amy McGrath hands power away from Kentucky because he's in this very influential role as majority leader.
A tremendous amount of money raised in this Senate race, and McGrath has actually outraised McConnell.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting because so she basically doubled the amount that McConnell raised in the third quarter of the year. She's raised around $84 million since she entered the race in July 2019. And I pulled up the Kentucky's annual budget because I was kind of curious about it. And, you know, that's more than the general fund allocates to public health for 2020, 2021. Granted, public health gets money from the federal government too, but, you know, that's a lot of money. And, you know, it's certainly an effort for, you know, Democrats have really tapped into this kind of this independent voter base, right? They're getting a lot of small dollar donations from across the country via Act Blue. And we saw a lot of candidates have these kind of record-breaking hauls this quarter. We saw Jamie Harrison in South Carolina pulled in around $57 million. We saw Sarah Gideon bring in around $38 million. And this is all around, you know, the previous record, which was $38 million by Beto O'Rourke in the last quarter of 2018.
Does Mitch McConnell have something really to worry about going into November?
So, you know, you gotta, like, Trump's at the top of the ticket, right? And this is a state that President Donald Trump won by 30 percentage points back in 2016. And so that obviously gives Mitch McConnell a huge advantage heading into November. You also have the fact that, you know, this is a steadily trending Republican state. So while a Democrat did just win the race for governor in 2019, a lot of that had to do with the fact about who he was running against. He was running against Matt Bevin, who is one of the most despised politicians by both Republicans and Democrats in Kentucky history. And so it's a really different kind of dynamic that's going on heading into November. There's a couple of things here, right? Mitch McConnell, you know, that popularity thing, since becoming leader, he's never really been very popular. And so he doesn't pitch himself as Mr. Popular. He pitches himself as Mr. Effective, you know, that line about punching above its weight. But there's also just, he's the architect of the modern day Kentucky Republican Party. So he's laid the groundwork. So while he, you know, trailed President Trump in terms of vote margin, President Trump won by about 27%, Senator McConnell won by about 20%. McConnell has really kind of done the work that has allowed Kentucky to be fertile for President Trump's picking. And if you look at the difference between 2014 when McConnell ran against Alice Lonergan Grimes and 2020 when he ran against Amy McGrath, part of where he picked up a lot of votes was in eastern Kentucky. You know, eastern Kentucky has become firm Trump territory. And I think that, you know, when you start to flip the rural counties in that way, and you basically leave only these two liberal islands of Lexington and Louisville, those margins are just going to get bigger and bigger.
That woman who said, if I don't get something, I lose my apartment. That is the reality for tens of millions of Americans.
Yeah, that really is the reality, right? As I went through the line and I talked to a lot of these people, you heard kind of the same sort of story over and over again about how difficult it is to make ends meet right now. These are people who filed unemployment claims in March, in April, in May. And so it's been weeks and weeks without them getting any money. So I talked to people who they've been skipping meals to make sure that their partner can have a meal. I talked to one man who he actually made it through the line. He got his money, but he had been evicted from one apartment and had to move to a second apartment.
We have several different labs and different types of labs, and they are having to get specialized equipment in as well and supplies. Right?
Yeah, so I actually worked on a story this week because the University of Kentucky just got up, their clinical microbiology lab just got up last week. And so I went there and I saw how they're doing this testing process. And, you know, there's been this big cry for more testing, right? Because so many people can be asymptomatic and have the disease. And so one of the things that they're struggling with getting more testing up is that they don't have the equipment necessary.
The Herald-Leader did a story this week about the catch-22 that businesses, especially restaurants, find themselves in. You know, they're put in the position of enforcing the rules. Their local health departments say they don't have the personnel to do it. The police departments don't want to go out on mask patrol. It's a big dilemma.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like the buck has been passed down from the federal level to the state level to the local level to the point where now businesses are basically the last line of defense in enforcing this. And my colleague Alex Acquisto, she talked to a business owner in Williamsburg who said his revenue had decreased 30% because he was enforcing the mask mandate. So it got to the point where, you know, a lot of businesses are struggling to stay open right now in the middle of this pandemic, and they have to make this really tricky decision of how far do I go in enforcing this? There just is no good mechanism for being able to force people to just follow the most basic public health guidelines.
The protesters have talked about a range of actions, more accountability, training, recruiting, all the way to some who talk of defunding police departments. Where is this discussion going as it moves perhaps from city halls and local county courthouses to the state and national level?
Well, so clearly there has already been change that has just come from watching this take place over the past 2 weeks, right? There have been minds changed, there have been hearts changed, there have been difficult conversations between families, and then there have been policy changes, things like the Louisville City Council passing the Brianna's Law the other day. The next step, obviously, is going to be whether or not we can see these sorts of changes on a state level and on a national level. And on a state level, it'll be really interesting because, you know, the legislature is still controlled by a lot of Republicans, and the Republicans in general in control are also a lot of rural Republicans. The issues might not feel as pressing for them as they do for people who are in Louisville or who are in Lexington.